right, students often ask, where do I find research for my speech? I'd really just rather talk. Well, that is not actually an option. We need research, we need support, we need those sources for our speeches to be credible. So how do we find credible sources? Well, I want to tell you a quick story. I have two pictures for you. And I want to show you the first one. And this one is from a time when I was a teenager. So this picture was taken in the Ozark Mountains. And I had a younger brother who talked me into doing crazy things. And one of them was what we call Wilderness Week, where we had a backpack and nothing else for an entire week. We spent 3 days on land and 3 days on the water. And what we learned pretty quickly we needed to survive was water. But it couldn't just be any water. It had to be good water. And in the Ozark Mountains, they have these bright blue lagoons. They're beautiful, but they're difficult to find. So we'd wake up in the morning, and we'd have our leader get out the compass, and we would navigate our way to this beautiful water. It was difficult to get to, but it was easy to consume. Now, I have another picture, and that is of Galveston Bay, and that is maybe not as pretty of water. But I want to tell you this, or ask you this. If your friend said, if you're thirsty, just get some water from the ocean, you would probably say you're crazy. It's not clean water. It's easy to find, difficult to consume. So I want to ask you a question. Where do you want to put your energy? Do you want to put it in finding, or do you want to put it in filtering? Galveston is water that you would have to filter a lot for it to be consumable. And I would argue that there are a lot of, there's a cesspool of information in the internet that you need to filter a lot before it's consumable. So let's start with the finding. So students say, where do I find research? The obvious answer is the library. That's been the answer for most of my entire life. You can find lots of great resources in our online library. They can be difficult to find, but once you get them, you can trust that they're pure and you can consume them. So periodicals, journals, these encyclopedias, quote books, what we call ebooks or monographs, all of these items have a level of accountability. It means some really smart people signed off on them. So it's easier to consume. Difficult to find sometimes, I'll acknowledge, but easier to consume. Now, if you insist on jumping into the cesspool of the internet to capture your information, you have to filter it. It's actually damaging to consume pretty tainted information. It's damaging to you and to the people around you. We'll talk about that in just a second. But I want you to remember these 3 key questions you're going to ask. Who wrote it? Did a doctor write that medical article? Or just a random person who has a random blog? When was it written? We have a term now called pre-COVID and post-COVID. Was that social media article written 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago? That research may not be current or relevant. Finally, who paid for it? Who sponsored that? You'll often find an agenda sometimes behind that information. So you want to ask yourself, who wrote it? When was it written, and who paid for it? All right, let's get some academic terms in you, and I want you to be able to identify the difference. If I were to pause this, I would give you a quiz and make you match these terms. Ready? Number 1, disinformation. Information that is deliberately false. People put it out there knowing it wasn't true. They were deliberate in deceiving, right? So that's your alliteration or your mnemonic. Deliberate information, disinformation is deliberate and deliberately deceptive. Number 2, misinformation. This is just false information that's not true. Misconceptions, conspiracies, could be just rumors. Somebody posted something and then it got reposted and reposted. It became this massive clickbait. And it wasn't necessarily intentional, but it could potentially be damaging. Finally, propaganda, and you've heard this term a lot in politics. But that's information that is presented, which may contain a little truth, but it's designed to provoke a response. There is an agenda behind it. It's designed to shift or to manipulate your emotions or behaviors in some way. So that those 3 terms are important that you know. I want to talk real quick about 2 kinds of information. So when you're researching in college, they're going to say you need a primary source or you need a secondary source. They may quantify how many of each one that you need. So here's the difference. Primary means it's firsthand, it's direct. They conducted the research. They did it. most, and this is what you're going to need to know for your quiz, is that most of your research is secondary. It's secondhand, it's not direct. They didn't connect the research. Harvard spent 20 years working on a study. They published the results. The Today Show talked about it. The New York Times wrote about it, but they didn't connect the research. Most of what we consume is secondary research. It's not primary research. Finally, as I wrap this up, here's my question for you. Where are you going to spend your energy? You have to research. You have to put support, credible sources into your presentations. Do you want to spend your energy finding good research or credible sources? Do you want to spend your energy filtering those sources? And I'll tell you what, some of the information that's out there, you could filter and filter and filter, and it still would not be worth consuming.